we're an alternative to grad school, if you will, right? So we people come to our programs. We say, if you don't get a job within 6 months of graduation, we'll refund your entire tuition, and we get you all the way to the job outcome, right? So it's really an intensive commitment of like 6 to 9 months. We are in the business of transforming people's lives and careers. And so we have set for ourselves, and people see a $23,000 salary increase once they complete a Springboard program and get a new job. So we've set for ourselves a goal of transforming 1 million lives by 2030, which is getting 1 million people into jobs they love in the new economy.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Gautam Tambay, the CEO and founder of Springboard. It's an innovative e-learning platform that uses a cutting-edge curriculum and a unique mentorship system to help people to get the jobs of their dreams. They've raised $53 million to date and helped tens of thousands of people through their programs. What they really care about is actually getting people where they want to be and actually getting the jobs, not just the skills. And as part of this, they have really high completion rates. Before founding Springboard, Gautam was an early employee at InMobi in the first 80 and watched that hypergrowth as it went from 80 people to 800. Now he's taking those lessons and applying them to his own business. Gautam was great to chat to, and I really loved this conversation. Let's get on to the show. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Gautam. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, and it's great to be here.
So we got carried away a bit before we started recording. We've been chatting for a little while. But for the people listening back home who don't know your story, don't know how you got to become an entrepreneur, what made you get involved in the whole startup world and starting to build your own businesses in the first place?
Yeah, it's sort of it's the dots always connect in hindsight, right? So I remember I was in consulting and finance, right? That's kind of where I started my career. And I had a moment when I was working at a private equity firm, splitting my time between London and Bombay, in a job that was very lucrative. And I was an intern, and I had the opportunity to go back and work at that firm at what would have been a staggering amount of money for a 26-year-old, right? And so I was thinking about, do I want to do that? And my friends thought I was crazy to even ask the question, because this is 2009. So this was, when finance was still very, very attractive as an industry to be in, and startups weren't really a thing. And I remember somebody told me, if you really want to think about where you want to take your career, and I was 25, 26 maybe, they said, find the 35-year-old whose life you want and do what they did. And so I looked around where I was, right? I looked around at the partners of the private equity firm that I was at, and I really admired them, but that's not who I wanted to be. It's just not life. And nothing against that. I think it's a really hard and hard job to do, and they were very successful at it. And that just wasn't me. So I thought about who are the people that I want to be, and then every person that I thought about who was this is a role model, I would like to be with them, was an entrepreneur in some form or fashion, right? So, and that was for me the realization that that's the world I want to be in. I didn't know how, but that's the world I want to be in. And so I was on the East Coast in Philadelphia at the time, and I started making trips every month to Silicon Valley and just started to meet people and started to figure out what about Silicon Valley makes it so interesting. And as I started to get into the ecosystem, I really, really started to like a lot of things about what I was seeing, especially the paid forward culture. So there was a lot of people were just willing to help. People were willing to take meetings and say, we don't know where this is going to go, but they were open to possibility. So that was very powerful. So that sort of started drawing me into this ecosystem. And then the problem that led me, so I joined a startup in Silicon Valley as an employee, and that was incredible. I saw a company called InMobi. We grew from 80 people when I joined to 800 people in 2.5 years, raised a bunch of money, had a lot of success. They're a pretty big company at this point. And that sort of confirmed to me that this is what I wanted to do. And then for me, the Springboard itself came about because I saw my sister apply to go to grad school about 8 years ago. She was a very talented illustrator, animator, wanted to be a UX designer. She applied to some grad schools, got into some great programs, and it just could not get herself to take a $100,000 loan to go get the skills she needed to get to the career she wanted. and she decided not to go. And watching her go through that process, I was like, wow, in this day and age, there's got to be a better way for us to help people get the skills they need to get to the jobs they want. And that for me was the impetus to start working on Springboard.
Yeah, and like it's really interesting because within Mobi, because it grew so fast, and you had that like experience as one of the first 100 employees. What made you then like start your own business? Where you said like because your sister did that, but were you scared at all to leave like such a growing company as being so successful?
Yeah, I had an itch to scratch, so I was actually very open. In fact, when I went to InMobi, I was very open with the founder CEO there, who I'm still friends with, and he was an early investor in Springboard, and he's been a great mentor for me. I was open about wanting to do the stint at InMobi as a way to learn and eventually do my own thing. And I remember the conversation. He said, "How many years are you going to give us?" And I said, "I can promise you 2." And then I don't know. And I remember 2 years to the day I started, and I had a great run there, right? I learned a ton. And I said, "Hey, Naveen, it's 2 years, and I'm starting to think about what's next for me." And he said, to his credit, he said, if you were going to leave to join another company, I would literally it would be over my dead body, right? But if you're leaving to start your own company, tell me what you need. You want office space, you want connections to investors. He's like, I know what that feels like. And anybody who leaves to start something, we're going to support them. And that was so powerful. So I took a 6-month sabbatical just to figure out what I want to do. He came up with a couple of ideas, and literally, I think we spent a bunch of time in the InMobi offices early on, just like brainstorming, meeting potential co-founders, and he just opened up his network and his resources to me, and that was very powerful, and that stuck with me always. Like, we do the same thing now at Springboard. We've had a handful of people leave to start their own companies, and when they want to do that, we're like, how can we support you? And I think that's the beauty and the power of that Silicon Valley ethos and ecosystem, right? Where it's can you think about somebody leaving an investment bank and they're saying, I'm going to start my own company, and the MD says, sure, how can we support you, right? It's not that environment. And I think but that's what people don't realize is what makes this ecosystem. And when I say Silicon Valley, like, it's no longer a place, right? It's at this point it's a concept, but that's what makes this ecosystem so unique and powerful. And people who are not in the ecosystem often don't realize it. I did not until I was in it, right? They're like, what makes Silicon Valley taken so special? They don't realize that there's just like norms and cultural habits and behaviors that have become embedded over the years that make it succeed, that are hard to replicate if you're not in that ethos.
Like, I had a similar thing when I left my company, and like I told them I was going to start taking what I'm doing on the side and making it full time, and like they didn't try to keep me because they said like the same thing. Like, if you're going to leave to another company, we'd try to like offer you more money, we'd try to offer you some perks. But I said, I think what you're doing now is like you're never going to be happy if you stay here, because you're always going to wonder and have the regrets of like, I could have done this and I didn't do it. And I think it's for people listening who may be in that position right now, they're working somewhere. You never actually know how your boss is going to react until you try.
Exactly.
And sometimes you'll be surprised about like how positive they could be. But one thing I think is interesting is that often when people are starting right out at the beginning, you want people who are going to be with your company for a long time and like believe in the ethos and stick with you. So it's quite interesting that Naveen, like, even though he knew that you were going to leave in 2 years' time, they still wanted you there. And do you have this experience yourself where you hired somebody in the early days, but you knew that they were going to leave after a couple of years? Or like, how would you react to that same scenario if you were on the other side of the table and somebody came to you and a job into you?
Yeah, it's sort of funny. On one hand, especially the early folks, you become so loyal to them, and it's such a it's in the early stages of a company, you're in the trenches, you're building something that really doesn't exist, and so the folks who take a bet on you at that point, for our first, I remember reading. I was on a plane. I was reading Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog, the Nike founder, and there was a line in that book where he says, the only word I can use to describe what I feel for my first 50 employees at Nike is love. And I read that, and I was on a plane, and I started bawling. Right, and I will, apparently, I've since researched. Apparently, when you're at a high altitude, it's easier to. I had put words to something that I had felt but just not expressed. it's like that is the only way that's the only word to describe what I feel for that early set of people who took an insane bet to join something that didn't exist, right? Like our first team member, joined when like Springboard, we weren't even called Springboard at the time, but literally it was a landing page that said coming soon. And and a blog post. Like that's it. Right? There's nothing else. There's no money raised, there's no money to pay salaries. And he's like, this sounds interesting. I'm gonna do it. And 9 years later, he's still here. Right. And so on one hand, you've got that sort of deep, intense sort of connection, and you want to be with these people and be in the trenches with them forever. And at the same time, you don't want to get in the way of their dreams. Because if you love someone, you actually want to enable their dreams. So and so for me, it's like if the question I try to ask them, if when people want to leave, right, is are you running away from something, or are you running towards something? Because if you're running away from something, I'm going to try and figure out what you're running away from, and is there something we can do about it? But if you're running towards something, by all means, like run faster, right? And how can I put you on wheels?
Yeah, I really like that. So you had the experience both as like a consultant and growing a startup. Like, which experiences do you think really helped you when you started Springboard?
I would say so, both, right? Both have helped in different ways, but certainly having worked at a startup was what really normalized the whole startup journey for me. And I'd say that helped in ways that were more direct, right? It was sort of like I had pattern matching from having worked at a startup. And not, to be fair, funnily, like because I joined in Mobi when there were 80 people, I thought I would have pattern matching at Springboard from day one. But the truth is, for the first few years when we were smaller than that and everything is very existential and your pre-product market fit, actually did not have pattern matching for that. And that was extremely stressful and hard and just gut-wrenching at times, right? And I had nobody warned me about that. But then once we got to a certain size, once we had product market fit, once we started growing the team beyond, say, 30, 40 people, that's when a lot of the stuff I'd seen at Mobi, I could just say, you know what, because I have this doc. It used to be called Lessons from InMobi, and now it's called Lessons from InMobi and Springboard, right? And so, like, once every couple of months, I'm reflecting and I'll have something. I was like, oh, that I'll just like write down a couple sentences. And now that doc is like 7-8 pages long. But when I started Springboard, that doc from InMobi was already like 2 or 3 pages long. There were like maybe like 15, 20 insights in there, and those were really valuable. But then the consulting, what that helped with is a few things, right? I think just work ethic, right? You show up, you work hard, you earn your keep, right? Like there's no entitlement. So that was helpful once you're in and I think just like clear communication, structured thinking, those things are valuable skills. So they have served me well, I will say. But but definitely the startup experience was more valuable from a pattern matching standpoint.
I'd love to go back to that document you have from the Lessons in Mobi. Is there any that you used? And like, if you had to like cut that 7-page or 8-page document down to say like 1 page, what would you keep? What are those like lessons that really stand out?
Yeah. When somebody is really inspired about something, even if you don't connect all the dots, there's something there, and empower it. Don't get in the way of it. And we saw this happen a couple of times at InMobi where somebody had this really inspired idea. And I remember one of the founders, they're saying, I actually don't see the value in, I remember pitching something very excitedly to one of the founders at InMobi, and he's like, I don't see the value in what you're saying, and I think I just can't get my head around it. But you're so inspired about it, we're going to fund it. And we're going to give you a little bit of, we're going to give you a limited rope, and you've got 4 months to prove it out and this much money. And then it worked.
Like with Springboard as well, you said it took you a while to get the product market fit. How did you find the product market fit, and what was it that you ended up with?
Yeah, I can walk you a bit through that journey, right? So when we started out in 2013, 2014, we said, education is broken, we're going to fix it, right? That's a sort of oddly lofty goal. And one thing that was wrong about that was, well, I mean, it was powerful because we said we're going to help fix this industry that's old and needs change. And at the same time, it we hadn't identified an actual user problem, right? So it's sort of like, and so it wasn't rooted in something that somebody needed. And so we said, okay, this is early days of online education. There were a lot of great, companies like Coursera, Udacity, Lynda.com, which became LinkedIn Learning after the acquisition, Pluralsight, which went public. All these companies were just taking off. And we believed, my co-founder and I, that there was a lot of great content out there. Let's just organize it and build a search engine for online courses. Quickly realized nobody cared for search. People cared for curation. So the query was not show me the best course in Python. The query was, I want to be a data scientist. What do I even learn? So we started taking existing content, which we had indexed on that search engine, and stringing it together into learning pathways, or essentially like playlists or curricula, right? If you want to be a web developer, do these 27 things in this order. It'll take you 300 hours, and you'll have the skills you need. So once you put these learning paths out, and I was, remarking on your unexpected journey to the 100,000 views, right? We put these learning pathways out. There were like 3 or 4 of them. We got to 100,000 registered users in a matter of 4 or 5 months. And that was amazing, right? We were like, how did that happen? All organic. We had no money, nobody, no funding. It was 4 people hacking away at things. And that was great. But the problem was people were signing up and nobody's completing. So we said, okay, we have all these users. The good thing about having users is you can talk to them. So we spent the summer of 2014 asking people what's going on. Why aren't you completing? And if I could summarize all those conversations in one sentence, it was, I need human support. I get stuck. I lose motivation. I haven't, it's lonely to study online. I have questions, but nobody to answer them. And that was the first founding insight, if you will, of Springboard, which was that most of what had happened in online learning up until that point was people putting content online. And in the offline world, you don't send someone to a library or to a bookstore and say, go become a data scientist. So why were we expecting someone to do that online where, Udemy is a discount bookstore, Pluralsight is a library. And they are great products, but they don't get you all the way to a career transition. So then we said, okay, so everyone's building libraries. What does a school look like? What if you build a school? And we said, what if you paired every single student with a mentor from the industry who worked with them one-on-one every week on a video call? So we reached out to a bunch of people who are designers and data scientists at Airbnb and Dropbox and these great companies. And we said, would you be willing to participate in an experiment where we pair you with a learner and you can help them every week? And that's one of the, there's many things broken about Silicon Valley. But again, going back to the ethos of like paying it forward, I was shocked. And I sent out these cold emails and people were like, sure, I'd be willing to do that. And I was like, really? Like, you don't know me from Adam and you are this really accomplished person at this great company and you're going to do that? And people were willing to try. And what we found is the completion rate on our courses went from like 5% to 50% when you paired somebody with a mentor. And that was the insight that to have transformational learning, most people need human support. And so once we found that, then we started to build more courses, build more mentors. Now we have more than 1,000 mentors on our platform. They work at all these great companies. We have multiple subject areas, we have short courses, long courses, career transformation, all those things, right? But it all started by putting something out there. First of all, being unafraid to put something out there. What we first put out there was a terrible idea, but we wouldn't have known what a better idea could be without putting something out there and getting feedback on it. And then that's the journey, right? So, and that's obviously sort of it's beautiful and all kind of strung together neatly when I tell you the story in hindsight. But then the 2 to 3 years of like going through that process, that was gut wrenching because every morning you're waking up and saying, is what I'm doing even valuable? And that's when, and especially like in that phase is when people are asking you questions that make you really uncomfortable. I remember my father-in-law, who is a man I love dearly, and he has only my best interest at heart. I remember him asking in like the early days of Springboard, saying, "So, when are you gonna get a real job?" Right? And he was coming from a good place. He obviously was coming from a place.
Was it sarcastic at all? Was that just like? Was it sarcastic at all, or did he mean it?
No. I think he was coming from a place of, I'm concerned for you. Right? I think he was coming from a good place, but man, did it hurt. Right? I was like, oh. Like I am doing, yeah. So, but again, that's the thing, right? It's when that's when, and I use that as a way to say that is when people are most likely to question and doubt you, and that creates self doubt, and so you're battling that demon, right, and other demons. And so while I can tell you the story of like, wow, like this all kind of, in hindsight, all the dots connected and all beautifully worked out, and I'm grateful for it. Uh, Man, that phase was hard. That phase was brutal. Like,
How did you get through it with the self doubt, with people asking you if you're going to get a real job? Did you ever think to yourself, like, maybe I should just actually call it quits? Or how did you get through that? What inspired you?
I just don't give up, right? Like that is like, I'm just very persistent. I will not take no for an answer. And so actually sometimes like those things would hurt, but also actually motivate me. So I actually would like put them in a doc, or like, things people have said that I'd like to prove wrong. And not from a place of like hubris, just from a place of like, I want to show to the world that this is possible. So that actually weirdly inspired me. And then I think the other pieces was actually just having a team that you're having a great time with. So that's the thing that actually also gets you through, right? So you're with a group. So for me, I'm motivated a lot by the problem we're working on and the impact it has on the world, because we're helping people transform their lives, and I'm motivated even more by the journey and who we are with. So for me, like one of my biggest motivators is people who took that early bet on Springboard as our team members. And we were talking about like, sharing how the only way I can describe what I feel for those first 50 people is love. And that's what it's something I got from Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog. But for me, a big part of the motivation was I don't want to let this group of people down. Like I want to make that bet worth their while. And I want them to be able to look back in a decade and say, that was a really good choice going to Springboard. So that was the other big motivator for me, was just, keeping holding my promise to them, which was, this is going to be worth your while.
Like, was the experience of getting funding as well quite validating in terms of proving people wrong, of like having known that like investors believe in you and you're able to kind of get that hard cash to say like, look, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. People believe in this and people are investing in us?
To some extent, though, I'll say I learned early, and I'm sort of fortunate to have learned this early, partly through our own journey of like getting to product market fit, right? That much more so than validation from being able to raise funding, what kept me going was the validation from our users, right? So there's something about having built something that people actually want, and then hearing the feedback of how that product is impacting them and is changing something about their lives in a very meaningful way. That was more validating than money from investors. Because at the end of the day, like you're going to, especially with investors, right? There's so much rejection, right? Like, what you see is the headline and you raised X million dollars, but what you don't see is like the 50 people who rejected you before that one person said yes. And is that validating? Absolutely, it is, right? It is validating. It is validating in sort of the startup community and with other entrepreneurs and all of that. But for me, I definitely got more validation from just knowing that what we are building is actually helping users. Because because you can build a company with no funding and a lot of happy users. You cannot build a company with all the funding in the world and no happy users.
Yeah, and like you've obviously made a lot of users already happy, but what's the ambition now from like where you are today?
Yeah, we set for ourselves a goal of, and so the premise of this is like our product is, we sort of we serve a few users and serve them really well, right? So we are we're an alternative to grad school, if you will, right? So we people come to our programs. We say if you don't get a job within 6 months of graduation, we'll refund your entire tuition, and we get you all the way to the job outcome, right? So it's really a intensive commitment of like 6 to 9 months. And that's what we do. We are in the business of transforming people's lives and careers. And so we have set for ourselves, and people see a $23,000 salary increase once they complete a Springboard program and get a new job. So we've set for ourselves a goal of transforming 1 million lives by 2030, which is getting a million people into jobs they love in the new economy. So that's the goal for ourselves. And if we do that, we will have created billions of dollars, actually more like, $100 billion in value for our users by way of job offers and how much more money they've made over time. So that's for us the next milestone.
And like, how do you plan to get there? What changes are you going to make, or what things are you cooking up?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So when you've got a goal like that, one thing I've realized is if you have some success as an entrepreneur, very quickly you realize what's gotten you to that point is not what'll get you to the next stage, right? In fact, almost like the reward of doing my job well is that my job completely changes, and then I suck at my job again, right? So, right, and so, but the same thing applies to the company, right? So what's gotten us here is not what will get us there, and specifically for us, what that means is we've gotten to this point by saying we're going to go direct to the consumer, right, and really, and that's worked well to get to the scale. We worked with tens of thousands of users. We've raised $65 million in funding. We have created $300 million in new job offers for people who've gone through our programs. And as we look ahead to the goal that we want to be, it's clear to me that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves in a couple of different ways. So one thing we started doing 18 months ago is, when I started, I had this sort of thing of it's either us or the universities, right? And we are better than the universities. And I had this hubris of a young entrepreneur. And over time, I realized, wait a second, it doesn't have to be either or. And to be fair, my co-founder was the one to realize this before I did. And we started working with universities. And we said, how can we power you to bring these very new economy, market-driven career skills to your audience who already loves you and respects you and puts a lot of faith in you. And so that's a new thing we started doing, and that's going really well and growing really rapidly. And then now, having established those first two lines of business, the consumer and then the university, we're now going into the enterprise and saying the cost of the skills gap at the end of the day is borne by employers. Savvy employers know it, right? And they struggle to hire. And what we're talking to employers about is how can we help you become a talent maker, not a talent taker, right? Because in a world where talent is constrained, and that is your biggest constraint to growth, how can we help you change that? And, in a world where the average millennial is going to have 15 jobs in their career, right? Education can't be one and done at the start of your career. You're going to have to reinvent yourself as a professional every 3 to 5 years and consume meaningful education every 3 to 5 years. But those 15 jobs don't have to be at 15 companies, right? So if you're a great employer, you could say, well, we could create a path for our employees where the first 6 of those 15 jobs are at the same company over a course of 15 years. And so you could start, working at a warehouse and then transition your way into customer success or sales. And then from that, you could transition into data analytics. And from that, you can transition into machine learning. And that journey could take 15 years. But if a company is willing to invest in you through different stages of your journey, that's very powerful mutually. And so that's what we're working with companies to say, how can we enable that for you?
Have you had any stories of people like you've met who've taken like Springboard courses where it kind of just like fills you and makes your heart warm, where you've seen the transformation they've had and what they've gone on to do?
So many, right? But one that comes to mind is, there was a 55-year-old woman, a refugee from China in the Midwestern United States. And she'd moved here. She put her kids through college. She wasn't working. She had some savings from when she moved. And then at 55, she decides to take a Springboard course. And she does exceptionally well at all of the technical components, right, in data science. And then she starts interviewing for jobs, and she's getting rejected and rejection after rejection because her English wasn't as fluent as people wanted it to be. And so that was really demotivating for her. Our career coaches are working with her and trying to keep her going. And most people at that stage, she's 6 months into she's had hundreds of rejections. Most people would give up. Not her. So she takes a job at a grocery store as a like at the checkout counter, so she can practice her English and get better at her English. And then with that, like 2 months of that, she interviews again and goes on to get a job. And now she's a data scientist.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's just one. Like we have a channel on our Slack called Feel Good Springboard, where literally every week we hear like tens of these stories, and that honestly, like, that's what keeps us all going.
And like, if people want to hear more about you and hear more about Springboard, where should they go to?
Springboard.com is the best place to go, and we got an about page that talks about the history of the company and the journey so far, and then it also has a lot of information on the programs we offer and how they can support you as an individual or your company, or if you're a university or at a university, we can support you as well.
Yeah, and like, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed chatting to you today.
Likewise, Amardeep, what a pleasure. Thank you for having me.